lay in the snow, wounded and broken, ready to give up. People called him a monster, and he had grown used to being alone. But a warm voice whispered, "You're not a monster." Can he believe that life can still change? The cold winter wind swept through the abandoned yard of an old house, shrouded in the gray shadows of decay. Among the rusted car wrecks, rotting wooden planks, and crumbling concrete slabs stood an old doghouse. Once painted, its peeling paint now revealed the decaying wood beneath. And next to it, he lay. Brutus was a massive German shepherd, whose name was whispered by children playing nearby when they wandered closer than they should. His massive body was covered in scars, his thick fur matted with dirt in places, and his left eye was cloudy and lifeless, a relic of a fight he'd won, though at too great a cost. He was free. The man who had once tried to turn him into a chained guard dog was long gone. He had left, abandoning Brutus like a broken tool that had outlived its usefulness. But Brutus stayed. The house was in ruins, the yard buried in debris, and there was no food to be found. But the doghouse remained. It was his only shelter, his only connection to a past he could barely remember. Every morning he ventured into the city, wandering through filthy streets in search of food. People looked at him with fear. His massive, powerful frame, scarred body, blind eye, all of it made him intimidating. He growled whenever someone got too close, protecting himself from any potential threat. "Monster," someone muttered as they passed. "Get out of here, you mangy mutt," another yelled, waving a stick. Brutus avoided conflict whenever he could. He left quietly, his stomach aching with hunger, his pride bruised. Every day was the same as the last. At night he returned to his yard. He curled up next to the doghouse, trying to conserve what little warmth he could. His body trembled, his legs ached from endless wandering, but he never complained. He had grown used to pain, loneliness, and cold. His cloudy eye stared into the darkness while his good eye gazed up at the gray sky. Brutus didn't know why he kept returning to this place. Maybe because it was the one spot in the world where no one chased him away. Here, he could be something no one else saw, just a dog, tired of fighting. But on rare nights, when the wind died down and the sky cleared, Brutus would look up at the stars. Despite everything he had endured, his heart still held onto a tiny spark of hope. Even if the world called him a monster, deep down, he knew the truth. All he wanted was a place where he didn't have to be afraid, a place where he could simply exist. Brutus was free, but his freedom was an illusion. He had been able to leave this abandoned yard long ago, yet every time he found himself returning to the old doghouse that, despite the decay surrounding it, he still called home. It held the last fragments of memories from a time when he didn't yet know hunger or cold. It was the only corner of the world where he didn't feel like an outsider, even though no one there was waiting for him. Every night, he lay on the frozen ground beside the doghouse, relying only on his own body for warmth. The icy wind howled through the rusted scraps of metal, wailing like a ghost. But Brutus wasn't afraid. His fear was reserved for something else. People, the ones who had taken everything from him and left him in this bleak loneliness. But one night, something changed. A storm rolled over the city, fiercer than usual. The wind roared so loudly that even Brutus, who was used to everything, felt uneasy. His cloudy eye strained to see through the darkness, while the clear one reflected flashes of lightning. Snow fell in heavy flakes, covering the world in a blanket of white emptiness. Brutus stood up, shaking the snow from his paws, and slowly walked away from his yard. He usually left early in the morning to scavenge for food, but tonight, something compelled him to move. Perhaps it was instinct. He trudged through the snow and the storm, his massive frame pushing against the howling wind. The empty streets of the city were cloaked in darkness, with only the faint glimmers of streetlights piercing through the blizzard. His paws sank into the deep snow, reopening old wounds, but he didn't stop. His breath formed clouds of steam in the freezing air. His heart pounded in his chest, but he pressed on, driven by something he couldn't explain. Brutus didn't know where he was going. There was nowhere to rush, nowhere to return. His life had been an endless series of monotonous days, filled with the struggle to survive. But tonight, for the first time, he felt he had to keep moving. After hours of walking, he reached the outskirts of the city. There, near a row of garbage bins, among scattered bags and broken boxes, he found what he had been searching for: the smell of food. Faint, but irresistible. Brutus cautiously approached. His large body froze in the shadows as he sniffed at the trash. He knew people might be nearby, and people almost always brought pain. But hunger was stronger. He pulled an old piece of bread from a torn bag, crusty and dusted with snow. He devoured it so quickly, as though afraid it might be snatched away. Then a voice called out behind him, "Hey! Get out of here!" Brutus spun around sharply. A man in an apron stood outside a diner, waving a stick. "Get lost, you filthy mutt!" the man shouted, stepping closer with menace in his voice. Brutus bared his teeth, growling deeply to keep the man at bay. It was the only way he knew how to protect himself. But the man raised the stick, and Brutus, unwilling to wait for the blow, turned and ran. He bolted through the snow, not looking back. His heart pounded in his chest, his paws tore through the frozen ground, but he didn't feel the pain. He just ran, away from people, away from their hatred. When he reached the outskirts of the city, he found an empty lot where he collapsed onto the snow in exhaustion. His massive body sprawled out, his cloudy eye closed, while the clear one wandered across the black sky. The word he had heard all his life echoed in his mind: monster. He didn't know why they called him that. Didn't know why people saw him as a threat. All he wanted was to live, to find a scrap of food, a moment of warmth, and a place where he didn't have to be afraid. The snow continued to fall, covering his trembling body like a cold blanket. Brutus shut his eyes, trying to sleep, though everything inside him screamed, "Get up! Fight!" But at that moment he was too weak. His story could have ended here, on this frozen patch of land. But fate had other plans. The snow continued to fall, covering Brutus's massive body with a thin layer of white. He lay motionless, his cloudy eye closed, while the other stared blankly into the void. His strength was gone, and it seemed this desolate patch of land would be his final resting place. But then, in the distance, the sound of an engine broke the silence. The low, rumbling noise grew louder, drawing closer. Brutus weakly lifted his head, his body immediately racked with pain, but he forced himself to listen. The vehicle stopped nearby, and soon footsteps crunched through the snow. He growled, a faint, almost inaudible sound, but his heart screamed the warning, "Don't come near." The footsteps halted. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a warm jacket, scanned the empty lot. His eyes landed on the dog lying in the snow. "Dear God," the man muttered, slowly stepping closer. Brutus tensed, but he had no strength left to move. He fixed his wary gaze on the man, his clear eye filled with distrust. He knew what would come next: yelling, a blow, more pain. The man stopped a few feet away and crouched down. "What are you doing out here, boy?" he asked softly. His voice was calm, free of malice. Brutus let out another growl, a weak rumble that barely left his throat. But the man didn't move. He just sat there, watching him. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of bread, placing it gently on the snow. Here, eat. You look like you haven't eaten in days." Brutus eyed the bread, but didn't move. His gaze darted between the man and the food. It could be a trap. Humans always brought pain. The man seemed to understand his hesitation. "I won't hurt you. I promise." He stood up and took a few steps back, leaving Brutus alone with the bread. Slowly, cautiously, Brutus struggled to his feet. His legs trembled, every step was agonizing, but he made his way to the bread. He sniffed it, then quickly devoured it, never taking his eye off the man. "Good boy," the man said quietly. The man returned to his vehicle but didn't leave. He couldn't bring himself to abandon the dog in this state. After a few moments, he came back, carrying a large blanket. Brutus tensed, his growl deepening. The man stopped in his tracks, raising his hands. "Easy, boy. I'm here to help. You'll freeze out here." He slowly approached, crouched again, and spread the blanket on the snow. Brutus watched him with suspicion, but didn't back away. The man reached out carefully, and when his fingers brushed against Brutus's head, the dog flinched violently. But there was no strike. The hand was warm, gentle. It didn't bring pain, and after a moment of hesitation, Brutus allowed himself to stay still. "You're not alone anymore," the man said softly. "If you'll let me, I'll help you." Somehow, the man managed to coax Brutus into his truck. The dog resisted at first, but hunger and exhaustion left him with little strength to fight. They began the drive to the man's home, a small cozy house on the outskirts of town. During the drive, Brutus lay cautiously in the back seat, his clear eye watching every move the man made, while his cloudy eye reflected the glow of passing streetlights. The man talked to him the entire time, his tone calm and soothing. "I don't know what you've been through, buddy, but I can see it's been rough. My name's Alex. Let me give you a chance at a better life." Brutus didn't understand the words, but he felt the calmness in the man's voice. When they arrived, Alex opened the door and showed Brutus a bowl of water and some food. "Here you go. Eat up. You can stay here as long as you need." Brutus cautiously stepped inside, his eyes scanning every corner of the room. Food, water, warmth, it was all so unfamiliar. But despite his hesitation, he slowly approached the bowl and began to eat. His gaze remained watchful, still filled with suspicion, but for the first time in years, a tiny spark flickered in his heart, a spark of hope. Alex didn't rush him. He simply sat nearby, reading a book, giving the dog time to adjust. Several weeks passed. Brutus still watched Alex's every move with caution, but he had started allowing himself to sleep on the soft rug by the fireplace. His body was slowly healing, and a spark of life had returned to his eyes. Alex spent time with him every day, talking to him, bringing him delicious food, and even taking him on walks. But every time Alex tried to touch him or show affection, Brutus would pull away, as if the scars of his past wouldn't let him fully trust again. One evening, as Alex sat on the couch, Brutus approached him. His gaze was deep, full of questions and doubt. He stood there for a long moment, as if searching for an answer. Then, cautiously, he rested his head on Alex's lap. Alex froze, not daring to move, afraid to break the fragile moment. "You're not a monster, buddy," he said softly, gently running his hand over Brutus's head. "You're just scared to believe again." But could Brutus, a dog with a broken heart, a shattered past, and a soul accustomed to loneliness, accept this love? Or would the shadows of his past forever linger in his heart? This was a battle he would have to win on his own.